Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. It's absolutely a beautiful day here in New Hampshire. Um, 41 degrees this morning. Fall is on its way. Thanks for joining us. My name is Colin Beasley, the ATC Board Chair. Like every other person and institution around the globe, we are doing things differently this year. We are all remote and being brought together by technology and the hard work of ATC staff. So thank you to the staff. Before we get into the agenda, I'd like to make a few comments. First, thank you to all of our members, our volunteers, our hikers, the visitors for your patience and cooperation during these trying times. Thank you to Sandy Mara, our president and CEO, and her team on providing to all of us the leadership necessary to understand the facts and build a response that is focused on our collective safety. Second, I would like to say thank you to Greg Winchester, Mary Higley, and Beth Critton. 3 board members who departed over the last year. They were long-term stewards of the ATC and strong advocates at the table with us. They are missed, and I simply want to call out a collective thanks. I also want to take an opportunity to recognize Sandy. As you know, it was just about a year ago where she stepped off the board into her current position. In the board's view, she has courageously, professionally, and with great passion led her team over the last year through a number of challenges, the greatest being COVID-19. The board is pleased with the outcome and has asked Sandy to stay on in her capacity, and we are happy to announce that she has graciously agreed. Thanks, Sandy. I also thought about what topic can I talk about? We talk a lot about a lot of things at the board meetings, and I've been pondering different topics, but the one I would really like to talk about today is stewardship. Stewardship is the crux of our ethos. It's going to be a subject that will occupy our collective conversation over the next couple of years. We all have the passion and vision to care for one of the most iconic parks in the world. The question is, what is stewardship? And over what are we stewards? And I think the third question is, who is we? So let's define the word. Per the Webster Dictionary, stewardship is defined as the conducting, supervising, or managing of something, especially the careful and responsible management of something entrusted to one's care. Dictionary.com defines it as the responsible overseeing and protection of something considered worth caring for and preserving. I suspect that anyone engaged with the AT or the ATC would agree with our being responsible for the trail. It's our core charter. However, I believe our responsibility necessarily extends beyond that trail, and I believe the framework upon which our trail was created, the Benton MacKay paper, sets that stage. Work over the last 5 years and embedded in the going forward strategic plan around the AT landscape represents what I believe to be the broader responsibility of our stewardship. The trail, which now exists thanks to the hard work of so many volunteers and the success of the cooperative management system over the last 100 years, now serves, perhaps serendipitously, as the backbone, the spine, the cornerstone, use whatever metaphor you're most comfortable with. This park serves as an East Coast landscape from Georgia to Maine, and it's critical to the environment, its wildlife, and frankly, to climate resiliency. The trail enables access to the wilderness for people with all kinds of interests. It's protecting a landscape that meets the needs of the hiker, the scientist, the naturalist, the bird watcher, the night sky watcher, and many, many more. Most importantly, the trail serves as the backbone for a broader landscape conservation effort that will assist its current, that's us, and future stewards to meet the challenges of climate distress. Some of you may know that the first through hike by Earl Schaefer didn't occur until 1948, 27 years, a full 27 years after Benton MacKay's paper, and 23 years after the formation of the Appalachian Trail Conference. Many of the challenges faced in Benton MacKay's period are similar today, and his paper was crafted to meet those challenges. Though I don't suspect he foresaw the extent of the climate and social challenges our planet will be facing 100 years later, nor did he likely understand the criticality of open space and the scientific answers to those challenges. His paper created a framework around which we can look at the environment and nature as a way to meet those challenges. So in my view, our current responsibility is our current responsibility is the trail, and that's the basic charter against which we've been working over the last 100 years. Our stewardship is far more than just protecting the trail. Our stewardship has far-reaching consequences. Regarding who? We are all vested with the responsibility of stewardship. It matters not what your background is or your political affiliation. The trail and Mother Nature are blind to those things that seem to occupy our mind and our talk these days. I hold out hope that the trail and our collective wish to have a place for respite, reflection, and recreation serve to focus our collective actions to care and preserve a space that can meet the needs of so many. As the quote says, "We do not inherit the earth from our ancestors, we borrow it from our children." I think our stewardship is that important. And I hope you can join us in advancing this broader 100-year goal. Finally, like last year, and I promise every year that I have the pleasure, the privilege, the honor of being on the ATC board, I would like to say thank you. This might sound familiar, and I intend it to be so. Thank you to our membership for entrusting the organization with your confidence. Thank you to all of our other donors, whether an individual, a foundation, a corporation, a small business, an estate, or any other entity which equally entrusts us with your confidence. Thank you all to ATC employees who tirelessly work in pursuit of our staggering mission and vision. You are one of the reasons why I am committed to this as well. Thank you to our partners, be they trail clubs, federal and state government, parks and agencies, the numerous communities, and the landscape conservation partners. Your support to our cause is critical to our success. And thank you to our volunteers, whether you're moving rocks, cutting trees, building or rebuilding privies, clearing or moving trails, working to eliminate invasive species, performing staff-like functions in support of ATC employees, whether you're a member of the board, the President's Leadership Circle, the Stewardship Council, or the Next Generation Advisory Council. Your commitment to our goals exemplifies what is so important to making progress in our society. And that's volunteerism, which is now more important than ever. And it's really the soul of our community. So thank you. We are humbled and honored that your passion is us. Finally, thank you to all the spouses, partners, brothers, sisters, daughters, sons, grandchildren, grandparents, and friends of those who volunteer. Their time with us is not time with you, and we understand that. And we appreciate your tolerance, and we want to ensure all of you, their passion is very well placed. So thank you to all of you. Now for the agenda. We have till noon today. First, we're going to hear from Jim Latore, our treasurer. Jim will then introduce Sandy Mara, our president and chief executive officer. While they're speaking, please send in your questions. The email address is election@appalachiantrail.org. Again, election@appalachiantrail.org. Those questions will be collected and sorted, and we'll answer those questions when the two of them are done speaking. After the questions and answers are completed, I'll review with you the results of the election. So again, thank you very much for joining us. Thank you for all of your support. And now I'm going to hand it over to Jim. Jim?
Thank you, Colin. And I'm going to share my screen here. Good morning to all members. Okay, I think I've got it. Well, again, welcome to all members. And this morning, I'm going to cover a few areas in the Treasurer's Report. So after a brief introduction of one of the newest members to Sandy's management team, I'd like to take you through a brief overview of what the financial results were for 2019, and also provide a little perspective over the 3-year journey that the ATC has been on. But more importantly, I'd like to cover where we are for 2020. As we all know, 2020 has been a year like no other, and I'd like to share with you how ATC management has actually responded to those challenges. After that, I'll share a few final thoughts before turning it over to Sandy. So let's begin. One of the newest members of the team joining us in October of 2019 is Nicole Prorock. Nicole joined us as our CFO. What I'd like you to do is imagine a pyramid and the 3 corners of a pyramid. Along the base of that pyramid is the foundation of a good, strong CFO. Nicole comes to us with her foundation in both external auditing and internal auditing, where she's developed deep skills in accounting, reporting, business processes, and internal controls. At the top of that pyramid is the relevant experience. It's how you apply that knowledge. And as you can see from Nicole's resume, she has had a steady increasing larger roles throughout her career, and a lot of that in the not-for-profit sector. So she's been an excellent addition to our team. A few fun facts about her. In addition to Nicole being a very, very strong and dedicated athlete, she's also a firefighter and rescue technician in the local volunteer fire company where she lives. And quite honestly, to understand Nicole, you have to know that she has already participated in a life or death rescue operation. But rather than me tell you that story, to really get a good idea of who Nicole is, I'm going to share a couple of pictures with you. And if a picture is worth 1,000 words, I actually have 3 pictures. But I warn you, these pictures are graphic, so you may want to turn away now. Here we go. On the left-hand side, you can see 3 experienced firefighters with the rookie in the middle, setting up the ladder and saying, "Up you go, Nicole." Middle picture all the way up there. Don't look down. Nicole's all the way up in the branches of the trees. And finally, on the right-hand side, success. Happy kitten, happy kid, all smiles from Nicole. All joking aside, one of the reasons I wanted to highlight Nicole is she has really brought some very strong credentials to the ATC, and we've made great strides in the way we report and the way we budget and the way we actually control our expenses and generate our revenues. But also when we talk through 2019, you're going to see that Nicole and several others have been an investment in the future of the ATC as we launch into the next 3-year strategic plan, which Sandy's going to share with you in a few minutes. So let's get into the balance sheet. For the balance sheet, I sort of feel like the cop on the beat who says to you, "Nothing to see here, folks. Please move along." Our balance sheet has been remarkably consistent on a year-over-year basis. So you can see the numbers. Our net assets grew a little bit, primarily due to the improved cash position because our investment portfolio did well at the end of 19, especially compared to the end of 18. But also there's been really strong cost containment and alignment of where we spend those costs to support the mission. So overall, the balance sheet remains in a very healthy position. With respect to revenue, the ATC is a relatively modest organization compared to other prominent non-for-profits from a financial point of view. But yet it is a very complicated organization, and it's complicated because it generates its revenue in 3 primary areas, which you see here. First and foremost, membership dues and other public support and contributions. Second area is where we receive grants and other contracts, task orders, from our federal and state agency partners. And in the third area is our publications and merchandise retail operations. So those are 3 different areas that have to be controlled and accounted for very carefully, and then add up to the overall revenue number. In addition, we have an investment portfolio and an investment subcommittee that monitors how those monies are invested to assure that we protect the assets, but also get a fair rate of return. And as you can see on a year-over-year basis, we're fairly consistent in most areas, Membership dues and public support, that can be more an issue of timing of when monies come in and when monies are granted. But the real story was down in the investment portfolio. You can see quite a big swing as the markets were very favorable at the end of 19 versus the markets being very unfavorable at the end of 18. The expense side, however, is very critical to us, as you would imagine. So let's talk a little bit how best to read this slide. Based on my experience, organizations similar to the ATC, where membership dues normally are not enough to cover your program costs and your overhead, and you must go out and raise funds, if you can return somewhere between 75 cents to 80 cents on each dollar into your program services, my experience is that you are doing well. You can see over the past 3 years, ATC has been able to return in that range of 75 to 80% per dollar into program services. And what are program services? You can see the categories below. Those are the things that directly touch the trail. We did have a really nice outcome in 2019 where we received several hundreds of thousands of dollars in like-kind contributions, more than we've received in the past, with a shout out to Hydro Flask specifically. And when you factor those out, the results look consistent on a year-to-year basis. But you do notice a little bit of a drop from 78% in program services to 75% in program services for 2019. The board actually considers that to be an acceptable outcome. And there are 2 primary reasons why. First, in real dollars, program services increased by over $500,000, from 7.1 million to 7.6 million in expenditures to work against our mission, to work for our mission of protecting, maintaining, and advocating for the Appalachian Trail. The second reason is what I referred to in my introductory remarks. The primary jump year over year in admin expenses and development expenses relates to salaries, wages, and related payroll taxes, and also into contract services. All of these were looked at by the board and approved by the board, and they're deemed necessary to be able to get the ATC lined up for the next several years, if not beyond, to deliver on the new strategic plan. Let's move to 2020. As I said earlier, 2020, a year like no other, and yet there have been several very interesting and very impactful, positively impactful events. First, very, very early on when the CARES Act came out with the payroll protection plan, ATC, under Nicole's leadership, evaluated our situation and moved very quickly to understand the program rules. And we applied for the loan and were granted $876,000. We anticipate that the ATC will qualify for 100% forgiveness of this amount. So here is a very quick, aggressive move on the part of ATC management to address the impacts of the pandemic. The second area is we had some unexpected and wonderful bequests coming into the organization. And one that I like to highlight is a $2.8 million unrestricted request that came from the estate of William Farkas. Some of you, I hope, have heard about this one before. And what I find to be the most amazing thing is that Mr. Farkas never stepped foot on the Appalachian Trail. Like many of us, he was enamored with the idea, with the ideal of an uninterrupted footpath from Georgia to Maine. A third major development that occurred during the year, and this was recently announced, was the voluntary conservation stewardship agreement reached with Mountain Valley Pipeline. The first piece of the funds has flowed. We are working with another organization. And the point here, we're still studying, by the way, just the accounting for it. But as previously announced, this money is going to help us significantly with our mission and our critical work to protect the land and the view sheds surrounding the AT in Virginia and in West Virginia. The last big item, excuse me, that occurred during the year, so far anyway, is the passage of the Great American Outdoors Act. Two critical elements among others in this act was the full and permanent funding of the Land and Water Conservation Fund, and also it authorized a restoration fund to address the deferred maintenance needs of federal public lands. So staff is currently evaluating what does this mean for ATC, how we go about as appropriately accessing the funds that have been made available, and how can that help us to continue to push forward on our mission to protect, maintain, and advocate for the trail that we all love. So these first four items I call basically new money that came through in 2020, but you can never forget from where you came. And in 2017, a truly foundational, innovative grant was awarded to the ATC by the Volgino Foundation. It was a $3 million grant taking us through 2020. And it was the cornerstone for building out the Appalachian Trail Landscape Partnership. If you're unfamiliar with the Landscape Partnership, please go to ATC's website. There's some really good information there. But in a nutshell, it's about 100 organizations that have come together to accelerate the pace and scale of land development and land conservation around the AT. This was a truly visionary event back in 2017, and it remains so today. So a sincere thank you on behalf of the board and on behalf of management to the Volgino family and to the Volgino Family Foundation. So what does it all mean? I was thinking of different ways I could possibly lay out how management has controlled their resources, evaluated their spend, and really hunkered down during this particular COVID crisis without giving up on the mission. And a good way to look at this is in what is in liquidity. So the rainy day fund. How much money does ATC have available, free and clear, over a 1-year period, should we run into issues where we need to supplement other monies that have been raised? And if you look at the bottom, the net financial assets, what it's basically doing is saying, tell me what financial assets, and financial assets are cash or near cash amounts, back out from that. Funds that are donor restricted or board restricted that cannot be used within a 1-year period, what's left over? And is that enough to be able to complete the mission during any one given year? The good news is, through some really tight cost management on behalf of the ATC leadership team, as well as looking and saying, where can we find new sources of revenues? How can we keep task orders flowing by doing the work that can be desktop versus in the field? All these little things that management put into place. There was no one huge thing. We were able to keep our costs in line, aided by the new money, as we just talked about, specifically the FARCUS commitment. And it resulted in our rainy day fund, as of the end of July, jumping by over $1 million. So we're not out of the woods. The fourth quarter is a very important quarter for the ATC, as a big part of our membership dues comes in during that during that period. And we all know it's been a tough year for so many people, but I believe we are well positioned as we move into the fourth quarter and into the new year. So let me close similar to the way Colin did. And that's really about volunteerism. And I'll tell you a little of my story. This became so real to me this past year. On February 26th, I left Springer Mountain and began my through hike. I walked into Hot Springs on the 22nd of March, and there I suspended my through hike. And I think it was just the very next day where ATC came out and requested that all through hikers respect the trail and come off, as we're still trying to figure out what the impact of COVID would be. And all along that trail, I was so impressed with how clean it was. I met several crews out there working away, lopping, weed whacking, whatever, removing blowdown. And quite frankly, it's an excellent condition. And it inspired me that when I did return I joined a trail crew myself and now participate through PATC, and just recently became a trail maintainer over a few of my own miles. So I hope that my story resonates with you, because your stories definitely resonate with us. So to all the volunteers, whether you're in the office or whether you're out on the trail, thank you very much. And with that, I would like to turn it over to our next speaker, Sandy Mara, our President and CEO.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you. And thanks, Jim. So I'd like to start by first taking a minute just to reiterate the gratitude that Colin mentioned. And first, I'd actually like to thank Colin, and I'd like to thank the board of directors for their support and their trust in me, and in allowing me the honor to take on this role. And I also want to very specifically acknowledge the staff of the Conservancy. Sincerely, your dedication, your commitment, your skill are daily inspirations to me and all the work that I do. So thank you very much. And as Colin said, to all our volunteers and partners, and the volunteers' partners and spouses and friends who allow those volunteers to be out working on our behalf, to our communities, to our advocates, our members, our donors, and our supporters, thank you very much. We're all in this together, and I so appreciate everything that you do. So it's been a little over a year since I joined ATC in this particular role as president and CEO. And when I took on the role, it was clear that there were definitely some things that needed to change and be improved. But I also knew that there was just tremendous potential. There was potential for where a truly empowered staff could next take this organization. There was potential where and how we can make our impact. There was potential, and not just to grow the organization for growth's sake, but instead how we can grow our work and our base to support and ensure that we accomplish our critical mission and our incredibly lofty goal for this organization. And while there's still much to do, even in this first year, I have seen that potential come to fruition. And remarkably, I might add, it's been in a year that's also brought a lot of unanticipated crises, which I'll kind of go through a few of them in a few minutes. But, you know, when we began thinking about 2020, we always saw this as a pivotal year for the organization. Over the next couple of years, we have some really incredible and key anniversaries coming up that will allow us to celebrate our past, but also really give us the opportunity to look forward. So next year, 2021, marks the 100th anniversary of the publication of Benton MacKay's paper, An Appalachian Trail, a Project in Regional Planning. It was through this publication that MacKay laid out his vision for not just the footpath, but also the surrounding lands and communities. 4 years after that paper's publication in 1925, the first meeting of the Appalachian Trail Conference convened in Washington, D.C. And so in 2025, we will have the incredible opportunity to celebrate our 100th birthday. And, you know, that's an incredible milestone for any organization, but particularly for a nonprofit, and particularly when I think back to what really was a ragtag group of folks out there with pickaxes and paint for blazes in building this trail that has led to us as a conservancy here today, 100 years later. So in those 100 years, we have built, managed, and protected a footpath, its surrounding landscape, and created a broad community of visitors, partners, and supporters. And it is something that truly is unique and unrivaled in American history. So as we prepare to start for these celebrations, and I think this is normal for anyone celebrating any kind of key event, you know, you take a time to reflect and think back to your past. you definitely evaluate where you are currently, and then you start to expand what's your vision for your future. And so in a few minutes, I'm going to be sharing our new strategic plan, which comes from our roots, but most specifically is meant to support our evaluation of our current situation and lay the groundwork for our move into the future. But, you know, this is 2020. It's a year like no other. And I don't think, I think I would be remiss to not just go through a few of the things that have affected ATC, both specifically to the trail and then just by virtue of us being a member of our global community. The year opened with a trail derailment in Harpers Ferry, which is my hometown. At the beginning of the year, a trail derailed on a key bridge crossing in Harpers Ferry that came from Lowertown over to the Maryland side and the C&O portion of the trail. And that ended up creating a 6-month break in the trail's continuity. And as you know, continuity is a defining feature of the AT. And that trail derailment was really only the first kind of break in continuity that the trail faced in this coming year. In February, the U.S. Supreme Court heard what's called the cow pasture case. And while there were definitely larger issues surrounding the case itself was very specific to how the AT is managed through multiple landowner jurisdictions. And an adverse decision in that case could very well have led to a dismantling of the cooperative management system in which the trail has been built and in which we thrive. So ATC did what it should have done, and it's our responsibility, which was help educate the court on how and why the system in which we work is critical to the protection and long-term well-being of the trail. So then there's COVID-19. And first, I just want to say to everyone listening, anyone who has been personally touched by this virus, our thoughts go out with you. It is a scary and devastating time for all of us as a nation and as a global community. And you know, it is important that we stand together as we enter into a battle to which most of us, if not all, are somewhat unprepared and unfamiliar with. Specific to ATC, the pandemic really led us to, for the first time ever, having to ask people to not hike on the Appalachian Trail. And we also had to develop, really seriously on the fly, protocols to deal with a global pandemic with little precedent or information, at least initially, in order to know how best to move forward. Following the initial lockdowns, and actually even during the lockdowns, we also came to realize that the fact that millions of people are out of school and working from home or not working, that really led them to looking for an opportunity to be outside, which has resulted in bringing truly record numbers of people to the trail, an increase that we don't feel is going to subside anytime soon. And, you know, at best, we are still in the middle of this experience. And there's still a lot that we don't know. So we do believe that there's going to be future decisions, but we can't tell you what they'll be until we are all there together. But we also do believe that there's going to be lasting repercussions that will significantly impact the way we manage the AT in the future. And then I'd also like to mention the global justice movement. The magnified and much more lasered focus on the existence and the impact of systemic and institutional racism across the United States has really driven home for us that unless we, as an organization, engage in broader demographics, the very survival and impact of what we do is at stake. So our orientation toward justice, while always there, but now more than ever, is not optional. It's absolutely mandatory. So what all these events drove home for me, and I think a lot of the staff and board, as we've talked about it through these 9 months, is that, well, the AT can absolutely provide respite from the trials and tribulations of the world that we live in. The reality is that it's not magically disconnected from our world. The romantic idea that the trail is some space immune from both the good and the bad of what happens in our world is not true, and that we are fully connected, both in the positive and the negative. But even with these challenges, 2020 has also been a year of opportunity. And where I really think in our ability to face these challenges has helped hone in on the identity of the Conservancy and both clarified it and enhanced it. So COVID-19 in particular really clarified our role, our leadership role in ensuring visitors and volunteer safety. And that our primary responsibility to the resource that we manage and protect and how best to do that. Cow pasture and our participation in that clarified our lead role in the cooperative management system and our critical place in coordinating that system of trail doers and dreamers. The Mountain Valley Pipeline voluntary contribution agreement, which I know all of you hopefully have seen the press release that went out, a very recent event. That agreement is really going to enhance our mission critical work to protect the land surrounding the AT and make sure this resource is protected in perpetuity. And the global justice movement has compelled us, rightly so, to accelerate and expand our engagement with new people and new partners. So what will next year bring? As I said at the start, the year marks a time to ensure that the foundation on which we stand is stable for our work today, but that it's also strong enough from which to propel ourselves into the next century. And it's through this new 3-year strategic plan that we lay out the work we will do to make sure this is the case. And so I'm going to share with you now that plan. So a few key points about the plan before we go a little in depth into the 6 key goal areas. So this plan is seen to really strengthen the foundation of the Conservancy. We see this next 3 years as primarily focused on short-term strategy while working towards a long-term vision, that's the next 100 years. And this absolutely lays out stepping stones with eyes on 2025, which we see as a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for ATC. It literally will be once in a lifetime for most of us listening here today in the ability to celebrate a centennial for the organization. And the other part about this plan is that it continues from our last plan, but I think drives home even more the concept of one trail, one Conservancy. The goals are very interconnected to each other. One does not happen without the other. Everything shores up the overall mission of the organization. And it also will allow our partners to be much more interconnected. No longer will we think just in terms of regions when we think about managing the trail, but what is best in Maine can be best for Georgia and everything in between. So first, I'd like to take a minute. We have slightly revised our mission and vision statements, and so I'm really thrilled to share that with you today. Our mission: to protect, manage, and advocate for the Appalachian National Scenic Trail. And the vision is incredibly lofty and something to which I really truly hope we can achieve, but I believe that it will be lifetime efforts on all of our part, is that the Appalachian Trail and its surrounding landscape are protected forever for all to enjoy. So now the goals. When we started developing the goals for the plan, we didn't just think about, okay, what's a goal for the organization? We really spent time trying to figure out, why is this goal more important than everything else that we could possibly put up there? And so I want to spend a few minutes as I share the goals with you is also talking about the why for each of these goals. So goal 1, which we see as an absolute cornerstone of everything that we do moving forward in our conservation efforts, is landscape protection. And we look to protect this landscape, not just for its natural beauty, which is critical to the trail and the trail experience, but also to climate resiliency. I think today in particular, anyone picking up the newspaper and seeing the news of what's happening to our western lands, to our sister trail, the Pacific Crest Trail, as well as other trails through Washington and Oregon, the climate change and the impact that it will have on every aspect of our life is a cold, hard, and sometimes fiery reality. And so looking at the East Coast and the vulnerabilities of this particular region of the country is more critical than ever. And the Appalachian Trail Conservancy, the Appalachian Trail is the backbone of the ability to create some climate resiliency within our entire eastern seaboard. And so the ATC sees its role in doing what it can to support that as one of the key things that we will focus the organization on moving forward. By protecting the landscape, we prevent the degradation of irreplaceable natural beauty, and we're protecting lands critical to adaptation and resiliency as the climate warms. We have big goals here. We're looking to protect 100,000 additional acres of AT lands in the next 3 years. That won't all be done just by ATC. It will most definitely be done through the broad network of partners that we already have in place through our landscape partnership program. But we will continue to invite new partners in and expand that base so that we can achieve this goal. Everything that we do is going to be built on science and the best practice of resource management to be sure that we are, in fact, preserving a healthy and resilient AT. And we also recognize that we need to continue to fight hard on Capitol Hill and in the states through a robust policy advocacy program, because again, we cannot achieve any of this alone. We need both our government and our private sector to support us in these efforts. The second goal, and as I mentioned, the pandemic has certainly opened up the concept of public lands. I think millions of people that never thought about our lands being available, and it's not just the AT, have suddenly, quote unquote, discovered the outdoors. And so visitor use management, while already was building into a key area that we knew we had to focus on because of increased use, has taken on new urgency now. So a high quality recreation experience is the AT's intended purpose. And it really is going to require a holistic trail management program which promotes safety, access, education, and stewardship, which, as Colin spent his time talking about how critical stewardship is to all the work that we do. Some of the efforts that we'll be doing under this is developing a trail-wide visitor use management system. And also that the education, information, and preparing trail visitors, really, really an important part. I think that it represents opportunities not just for ATC, but for our clubs and other partners up and down the trail to be able to get out there and support these new visitors and transform these visitors from trail users to trail stewards. I think one of the key things and one of the values of recreating on the Appalachian Trail is that we can draw that link from the opportunity to hike to the obligation that we each share in protecting the lands to allow us to continue that recreation. Goal 3 is cooperative management, strengthening the shared stewardship, which is always at the core of what we do. So as partnerships evolve and national demographics shift, volunteering, partnering, and codifying management agreements also need to evolve to sustain the AT into the next century. Key areas that we want to do here is make volunteering open to all and easy to do. We truly are going to spend time planning for this second century of cooperative management, bringing as many voices as we can to the table to start to envision what that network and that support system looks like as we move forward. And again, continue to try to strengthen our agency partnerships as well. So both at the federal level, but also really focusing in on our state and local levels. Engagement. This is how we talk to everyone. And we really recognize the value of enhancing our communication strategies. And again, one of the things that I think ATC has done, and it's done well, but it's always sort of worked somewhat intuitively. And we're recognizing more and more that using research-based and audience-driven kinds of communication strategies is really the best way for us to engage and grow our community of stewards, visitors, and supporters. Part of our goals here will be developing a multi-channel communication and branding strategy and developing a comprehensive visitor experience and interpretation plan, which will go back to support both our visitor use management plans and our education and outreach regarding our cooperative management and ability for people to volunteer. With any foundational evaluation, though, there's the basics, right? The core pieces that you need to do what you need to do. And that really falls to capacity. And in addition, we would be remiss if we didn't take time to ensure that we continue to be prepared and ready to face risks, both those that we can anticipate and the unanticipated. Our ability to execute our mission critical work is directly proportional to the infrastructure and capacity that supports it. So some of the efforts here is going to be laying the groundwork for a centenary campaign and celebration, strengthening and reorganizing ATC's fundraising efforts, much of which are already underway, as Jim mentioned, improving our digital infrastructure and experience, and developing a framework in order to manage risk. Our last goal is around, as I mentioned before, justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion. And though this is called out as an individual goal within the plan, I want to really stress that we see this as a fundamental thread that runs through everything that we do. And without that thread, I truly believe that everything will eventually unravel. So it is really important that staff will build this, it will be through this lens that staff will look at all the work that they do as they develop their work plans. The board is looking at it as they develop their committee charters and their commitment for work moving forward. This is fundamentally how we will measure how well we do everything, is ensuring that everything we do includes a focus on justice. So in fostering a culture of inclusion, the ATC will cultivate greater strength and resiliency as we work to manage and protect the AT and its greater ecosystem of communities and people. We're looking to create engagement programs for younger and more diverse audiences. As I said, we see this as really a complete culture shift that's oriented toward justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion. And we also see the role and responsibility of our AT communities in our overall management structure. And we see this as a real opportunity to create a strong framework to better define the roles and responsibilities. So this strategic plan will prepare the Conservancy to celebrate, first and foremost, the incredible history of not only the Appalachian Trail, but also the organization which made it a reality. The strategic plan will also, I believe, help to prepare us for its second century of AT management. But like everything else on the Appalachian Trail, no one person, no one staff, board, organization, club can do it alone. Just as we've built our incredible past on partnership and support from everyone, we also need to build our future. And we need you. We need your engagement. We need your stories to share and inspire others. We need you to be advocates. We need you to be volunteers. And most importantly, we need your support. So thank you.
Hey, thank you, Sandy, very much for that. And Jim, thank you for your your comments. I got to tell you all, I'm wowed every time I have to be engaged with staff, Sandy, the board, all those who are volunteering. It's been a wonderful experience for me, and it's a wonderful way to spend time. So thank you, Jim and Sandy. I appreciate that. We're now going to move into the phase of doing our questions and answers. This is the fun part of our meeting. We're going to open up the conversation to those of you who joined us. Again, for those of you who have a question, please email them to election@appalachiantrail.org. You can see it on your screen. And I'm going to introduce Lisa J.E.D., who's from the Advancement Department, who will field those questions to Sandy, Jim, and myself.
Good morning, everyone. This is Lisa J.E.D., the Appalachian Trail Conservancy's Director of Development. And it's a real pleasure to have you all here with us this morning. And I just want to start by thanking everyone for submitting such amazing questions. We received a lot of them. So we're going to do our best to answer the questions that you submitted. As Colin mentioned, you can still submit questions to the election@appalachiantrail.org. And we'll really do our best to address them all on this call. And if we don't get around to it, we will try to follow up with each of you personally offline as well. So our first question, it's a great question pertaining to justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion. And perhaps it's a question for Colin and Sandy. And it's, I know the national parks have in the past few years started to hire more rangers of color, recognizing that one main reason people of color don't use their parks is they don't see people like them working there. What is the ATC doing to recruit board members who are not just white men? Specifically, what outreach is the organization doing to engage people of color?
Well, why don't I start with that? So I don't know whether you've all had an opportunity to look at the most recent Journeys magazine. You'll find a short article in the back of that magazine that I wrote up. We, the board, started looking at the J.E.D.I initiative probably about 18 months or so ago. And as we looked around the table, we recognized that our frame of reference was limited. We are 1,000% committed to justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion. It's not just about people of color. It's really trying to bring around the table people of different backgrounds, of different interests, of different points of view. Having a well-rounded conversation around the table, I think, would make the board, our policies, our investigations much more thorough and much more complete. So we are committed to J.E.D.I, not just as far as our board representation, but how we represent ourselves to the community, how we work with Sandy and her staff on driving it to the organization at large. And as I indicated in that article, candidly, I would say that the organization is a bit ahead of the board, and I want to call out to them and recognize that to them. They've done a lot of great work over the last few years as a result of the strategic plan that was initiated 6 years ago. That work resulted in the now J.E.D.I work that's laid out in the next 3 years. To get to the question, how do we expand the board diversity? We're all learning. And I would say that in effect, what we're going to do is work with as many organizations as we can. It's not as much bringing them to us. We need to go to them. And we need to learn how to do that and what we can bring of value to those folks that we think are important to our conversation and how we can contribute to their conversation. So that open channel is something that we need to explore. We intend on doing that. We intend on being further educated. Sometimes those conversations can be uncomfortable. I'm comfortable with that discomfort, if that makes sense. And we are committed to making that happen. So if Jim or Sandy want to make additional comments, I'll open it to you.
I'll just add to that, Colin. And Colin just gave you really how the board is thinking. But a couple of really tangible things have happened over the past 6 to 10 months. One is that the board studied our bylaws and we looked at the way we are constituted as a board, and we voted to add 2 additional seats to the board itself. The second thing is how we went about soliciting nominations and looking at the qualifications to fill those seats as well as other seats that had become open during the course of the year. And I think you'll see during when Colin presents the results of the voting that we have taken tangible steps to change the nature of the discussion that happens at the table by expanding the kinds of people that sit at the board table. So maybe Colin will hold that, because I think when you show the results of the voting, hopefully, people will see that it's not just talk. We've actually taken solid, tangible steps.
Yeah, and again, it's very important that, as I indicated in my article, we have to walk the talk. And I think it's important for all of us to recognize that it's not just, it's not just what it is that's around the table of people of color, male, female. It's really trying to get the full interest of our society represented at the table. So that's what we're going to do. I mean, that's our intention. So thanks for the question. I appreciate it.
This next question specifically relates to the pandemic and perhaps is one for Sandy to answer. And the question is, there's been a large increase in the number of hikers on the trail, especially during the beginning of the coronavirus outbreak. What steps is the ATC taking to help manage this increase in hikers and make sure the trail is not permanently damaged?
So as always, we are working collectively with our volunteer maintainers and our clubs and our partners towards that work as we head into the end of this season. It was difficult because at least at the beginning of the pandemic, we had to call back our field staff, our ridge runners. We asked our clubs to stand down as far as going out and doing what would be their routine spring maintenance. And I mean, since we've gotten permission from the National Park Service for volunteers to go back out into the field following our COVID guidelines, they've just done yeoman's effort in clearing blowdowns and attacking weeds that had really overgrown because they missed the pre-spring preparation trips. I know Jim locally has been going out with the Potomac Appalachian Trail Club, and so can certainly speak to his personal experience if he wants. We've also been able to not just also redeploy our ridge runners, but in some areas we've been able to add some additional ridge runners to help with the influx. I think longer term, though, this will continue to be a challenge. And so I think that there's a few things, too, that everyone listening can also think about in supporting. One is actually, quite frankly, is advocating, particularly at your local congressional level, for increased base funding to the Appalachian Trail Park Office. That base funding is what supports them being able to staff up, particularly in the areas of actual rangers, boots on the ground. And as you know, ATC has no law enforcement authority, so we have to rely on our single ranger for AT, and as well as their partnerships with local police forces and search and rescue groups. And so if we can collectively get the National Park Service and get the funding for the National Park Service to pay attention to that staffing need at the park office level, that can really help. And I think it's a critical component of us being able to successfully manage the trail into the future. I also think anyone who has the opportunity to go out and volunteer to consider doing so. If you're not already a member of your local club, or also by visiting our website, you can see other kinds of opportunities for volunteer trips because we really can use all hands. And then, the ATC supports significantly both through our hires and in then granting out to clubs for them to hire directly ridge runners, but none of that support financially comes from the Park Service. So everything that we do to hire our ridge runners, we have to rely on our membership and personal donations to support. So again, another area that as we continue to need to grow it, we also need the capacity to grow that kind of support on the trail.
Well, the next question is a perfect segue to that. And this question, I think for Sandy as well, with the standard membership donation being just around $50, what is the real impact being a member of the ATC can have?
So first of all, what your membership represents that's much more important than the singular dollar value is a outward statement on your part that you believe in the mission of ATC. And that's invaluable. And the more people that we can demonstrate have made that statement, even just through that individual membership, the more that we are able to leverage that support for donations from other sources, foundations, corporations, major donors. Many of those folks, what they want to see first and foremost is how many other people, other than the staff sitting in front of them or the board member sitting in front of them, how many other people share in that mission. And so that's, to me, the most valuable piece of your membership. It's that statement of support. Also, you know, there's the saying, it takes a lot of drops, but you still eventually are going to fill up the bucket, right? So yes, your individual membership is part of a collective whole that we can absolutely rely on an annual basis, that we know is going to be there, that we know it is money that we can choose how and when to spend based on our best judgment. Sometimes donors, you know, will make a gift, but they'll want it for a very specific program or project. And that's really important. But, you know, and I've said this for as long as I've been involved with nonprofits, which has been most of my life, is all those programs and projects are really important. But at the end of the day, we still need to pay salaries. We need to pay electric bills. And those things take dollars too. And membership dollars can be those critical dollars that can help to support all of the things that support ATC. And I think the final thing is that, you know, 75% of every dollar that you give goes back to what we do. So please don't feel that, you know, that membership dollar is being lost into some kind of overhead place where it's not really making an impact. So yes, your membership dollars are of critical value and importance to the ATC.
You know, and I would add to the earlier comments of Sandy that it takes a village, and the more advocates we have of the Appalachian Trail and the Conservancy and what our mission and vision is, the more impact we can have with all the constituents that we're working with. So it doesn't matter what you give, the fact that you're giving whatever you can is a strong message as we bring those numbers into a community, to a village that will have an impact around us. And we appreciate everything you can give us. So thank you.
For those of you who are continuing to submit questions to the election@appalachiantrail.org box, thank you. We're receiving them. Initially, we were responding to each question as they came in, and now we're getting so many that we're unable to do that, but we're reading them and we're getting them, and we thank you. A lot of people had questions about this next topic, and I'm going to consolidate them all into one question, and that is, can you explain the voluntary conservation agreement between the ATC, the Conservation Fund, and Mountain Valley Pipeline? Why do you see this as a success for the AT after previously voicing opposition to this pipeline?
You want me to start, Colin? Or
go ahead.
Sure.
Yep.
So let me start by laying just a little bit of groundwork about the role of the Conservancy and what's always been our role. Is we, kind of in the way that the trail is seen as a spine, you know, where you sort of balance in the middle on either side. I really see that as ATC as well. There's a lot of things that go in to being able to effectively manage and maintain this resource. And it takes a balancing act. I definitely see ATC as the primary, as the organization responsible for ensuring that all the constituencies, all the needs, all the wants, all the obligations are as best as we can met, and all feedback to ultimately the healthiest and best decision for the trail. And our mission too is primarily to protect the Appalachian Trail and its surrounding landscape. That's what we do. So yes, absolutely. We stood with the communities in Southwest Virginia where the Mountain Valley Pipeline was moving through at the beginning, as we do. We have a robust and well thought out and well developed pipeline policy that really dictates how, when, and in what ways ATC takes a stand regarding not just pipelines, but also just overall. We have policies that talk about energy infrastructure projects crossing the AT. And we followed that policy. But that policy also includes that it may come a time where the role of the Conservancy is to look to what is happening with the project that we at some, through our best judgment, recognize is going to happen regardless of the battles that may be surrounding it, is what is our obligation and what is our opportunity to do what we can to protect the resource that we're responsible for, which is the Appalachian Trail. So with, I think, 92% of the project done for the Mountain Valley Pipeline, and understanding that this last piece is it's getting its permit from the Forest Service to move across the Appalachian Trail, our role became, how do we advocate for the trail and work through this last piece of that project? When Mountain Valley Pipeline approached us about having these conversations, we were willing to come to the table. We came to it eyes wide open. We came to it thoughtfully. We spent, quite frankly, this probably is close to a year since the initial outreach was, since we were initially reached out to. So it was not something that we entered into quickly or lightly. But at the end of the day, the corporation was making a good faith effort to make a contribution to the Conservancy to support key aspects of our mission, which is protecting landscape and protecting the communities that surround that landscape, and helping and supporting those communities. And we absolutely believe that the work that we're going to be able to do with really what is a historical contribution to ATC is going to result in net conservation gains for the trail. And so we have, in fact, done our job, which is doing the best we can for this resource. I also want to add that, particularly the question, I think, included why we joined with the Conservation Fund. I think their work in this area of protecting land and is really just unparalleled. And so while the contribution is coming to ATC, we're going to be working very closely and really use the Conservation Fund as our primary agent, so to speak, out on the ground to help broker these land protection deals. And I think that, with their expertise and their infrastructure, which is incredibly robust compared to ours as far as just being able to handle the process of acquisition and protection, will go far in even further leveraging this contribution.
Yeah, and so let me add. We know, I mentioned earlier in the morning, the trail goes from Georgia to Maine, and the policies there, because we recognize that there will be infrastructure projects that need to cross that demarcation point, that footpath. And those policies are there designed to help frame the ATC response to those initiatives. And to Sandy's point, those policies were followed. I think what's important is to recognize another aspect of this whole thing, which is if somebody reaches out to the Conservancy and is looking for the Conservancy's input on how to best manage the consequences of their initiative, the board's talked about this, and our feeling is, in our view, it's better to be an active participant in that conversation than a passive commentator. So we will be active. It doesn't preclude us from being active in future projects. We will continue to be active according to our policy. In this particular case, when MVP reached out to us, we considered it important that we be at the table so that we can help influence how improvements can be made as a result of their contribution. So I just want to add that piece of it.
We received a lot of questions about, Sandy, about your letter, A Commitment to Justice. And I'm going to kind of consolidate those into one question as well. What compelled you and what inspired you to write the letter titled A Commitment to Justice? And how do you see justice as a part of ATC's mission and vision? And then in addition to that, we received a lot of questions about what steps ATC is taking internally to create changes and to become more inclusive as well.
Sure. So I guess, first of all, I want everyone to be clear. This isn't something new. It's not like I just woke up one day recently and said, oh, I think we need to do this. Quite honestly, I mean, for those of you who know me, I've been involved with volunteering in leadership roles for the trail, and both at the local level with the Potomac Appalachian Trail Club and ATC for over 35 years. When I was president of the Potomac Appalachian Trail Club in my 30s and 40s, and really taking on leadership roles there, it was clear to me even then that the club, in particular at that point, but just outdoor and recreation and what we did had sort of a bit of a diversity problem. And I remember actually writing a letter to the then AT magazine when we were the Appalachian Trail Conference, and I was president of PATC, talking about the criticality of us as an organization, recognizing, and I think I put in statistics of what the statistics would have been in the 90s as to the changing demographics in this country, and talking about the fact that as an organization that relied on membership, right? I just talked about the idea that members enhance the value and the ability of an organization to do what it needs to do because it shows, it demonstrates a commitment to its mission. If we want to continue to grow that membership, if we want to continue to grow advocates and stewards for this critical resource, we need to recognize that we need to grow who those people are. We need to expand beyond a very specific slice of our society that is actually growing smaller in just its hard numbers, if nothing else. I mean, there's just going to be fewer of that particular slice moving forward in that big circle that makes up our country. And so if that's the only slice we rely on, what that means is all those supporters, all those stewards, all those advocates for us and for the trail will also be smaller and smaller. So this is simply a continuation of that. And as I think that COVID-19, at least for me personally, has really shown a much brighter light on just how unequal things are in our society, and how I think kind of collectively across the board we may have lost our moral compass in a lot of areas. And so as much as it's wreaked havoc and there's things that we would say are not good, I also see it as a true opportunity for transformation. And I think that, it wasn't a matter of waking up and saying, oh, I think we should do this because it'll be a good thing. It really was waking up and realizing, we have to do this. We have to get our voice into this mix now to demonstrate that we are there from the start of this transformation of what I hope will be a transformation, first globally and as a country, but also very specifically to outdoor recreation. I mean, we're not alone in that lack of diversity. The whole environmental movement and the whole outdoor recreation movement, we've suffered from a lack of diversity for a long time, both from corporate outfitters and the people who make our gear, to the organizations that manage our resources, to those who collect money for its protection. And so we collectively have got to figure it out, because this outdoors, as we've seen, it's not guaranteed just by virtue of being part of the federal government that it will in fact be protected in the future. It will absolutely take the collective voices of our citizens. And we need to have that largest collection supporting and advocating for the things that we consider the most important. So that's why I really felt strongly that it was time to put that stake in the ground, so to speak, that this will in fact be our centering point moving forward. So all that being said, I do not want to pretend for 1 minute that we personally, ATC, does not have a lot of work to do. Our staff is not diverse. I am not diverse. I'm a older white woman, also part of that demographic that I'm talking about. And we, I've learned a lot. I think that, so one of the first things that we're doing as an organization is recognizing that we have to educate ourselves. We can't just invite people in and then continue on with business as usual, because the business as usual is built around a particular construct. And that construct, clearly, for one reason or another, has not to date been one in which we have voluntarily seen people of color and a more diverse audience willingly wanting to come into. So we've got to first dismantle that construct and understand what that means. And we need to understand what our words mean. We need to understand what are the right actions. We are going to definitely make mistakes. I am going to say things at some point that's going to upset people or be incorrect or be, express my ignorance in really understanding where people are coming from and how I should be talking, because it's the construct in which I grew up in. So this is a real shift for me. But that we see as the critical piece, because as Shalan Desai, who's our VP of advancement and has taught me a lot just himself in this, we have to have the right table set. So if you're inviting folks over, I'm a big cook, right? And I love to entertain. So I kind of put it in those terms. If I'm inviting people into my house, I want them to feel comfortable and safe in the setting. I want to make sure that the meal I'm preparing are things that they find enjoyable and palatable, and it doesn't impact allergies they may have. That that table needs to be set first and foremost before everyone can come in, and then that somewhat becomes just part of the background, and the real conversation and the real value of that gathering can take place. But if in fact they're at the table feeling uncomfortable to begin with, we'll never get to that point of that valuable conversation. And so that's the work that we're doing now. We're looking at our hiring practices. And we also are having tough conversations about how do we make space, right? You can't invite new people in if there's not a spot for them to get to. And I think that's one of the hardest things. And I think, the board is going to face this as well, is some of this will actually mean that at some point I will have to step out in order to allow someone to step in. And that's hard. Because you love what you do and you kind of want to think, oh, I want to keep doing it. But again, at the end of the day, that commitment and that understanding that the world is going to eventually be large enough that there'll be places for all of us is part of what will drive me, at least, to support that effort.
And I would add, as I said earlier, right, the trail and Mother Nature are blind to these things. And as stewards of one of the most iconic resources in the globe, we owe it to knock down those barriers, to address those issues that are confronting society. And so as leaders of this community, we think it's important. The board with Sandy and her staff, we're all getting on the same page. We're all going to be educated, and we're going to make the necessary steps so that inclusivity is a common point on that trail and within the confines of Mother Nature in that area. So, Lisa?
Well, in the interest of time, now that we're nearing very close to the noon hour, Colin, I think I'll just make that the last question and I'll turn this back over to you.
Okay. I'm sorry. So you're not going to ask another question?
I think we'll make that one the last one.
Oh, okay.
And I'll hand it back over to you now.
Okay.
Thanks.
All right, thank you. Okay, so let me give you the board election results, if I may. We had 5 candidates up for re-election, and we have 2 new candidates. The 5 candidates were myself, Rob Hutchison, who's currently the vice chair, Dan Howe, who is the interim chair of the Stewardship Council, Colleen Peterson, and Nathan Rogers. And our new candidates are Raj Singh and Ebony Preston. The election results have a 93.5% voted for the slate. So congratulations to all those people on the board of directors. If we could, just in closing, this is really concluding our 2019 annual meeting. I'd like to introduce you to the rest of the board. You can see that we have folks who have been with us for some time, and there's quite a few folks who are brand new. I'd say probably close to 50% have been with us less than 3 years. And I think that that is bringing in an incredible amount of different points of view. It's really important that the board begin and continue to manage the continuity of awareness and institutional knowledge and bringing in new ideas. And we intend on doing that for going forward, obviously. Anyway, so for those of you who joined us, thank you for taking time this morning in doing so. Thanks for taking time and asking your questions. If your question was not answered, we can work with Lisa Zaid and get an answer out to you. Your support is important to us. We appreciate your support, whether it's volunteering, financial, or both. We need both, and we appreciate everything you do for us. And with that, I'm going to say thank you and enjoy your day.